Okay, so let's pick up with the second part of our lecture here and continue talking about immigration push factors. What pushes people out of one area to another? Generally, we're thinking about or discussing what pushes people out of rural areas towards urban areas. But these same things can apply for what pushes people from one country to another. Why do so many people immigrate to the United States? Well, consider all the push factors that are pushing people out of countries like Central or Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, China, etc. You have populations growing in these other countries. There's no jobs, there's no opportunities, the racial religious conflict, all those things cause people to say, hey, I'm going to move. It's time to find a better opportunity for me and my family. In some cases, land ownership. By a wealthy elite. So lots of land owned by a few rich folks. Where do you live? If you don't work for them, you don't have a place to live. They, kick you out. You're gone. So now, granted, if we go back throughout history, that was probably a much more important push factor throughout history when we had large sections of different countries controlled by the wealthy elite, making life pretty bad for people and those people leaving those environments. But again, we can see that in rural environments now. You get a wealthy landowner goes and buys 400 or 500 acres of land. Nobody's going to live on that except the landowner, the wealthy guy or the wealthy family. So they're, in a sense, gobbling up the land in the rural environments in some communities. Another factor uh, for a lot of folks might be the way agriculture has changed with the movement in the agricultural industry towards large farms, large what we call monoculture farms. We're farmers now farming 500 acres of just corn or just beans or half of beans, half corn, etc. This decreases opportunities for the small family farm. They just financially can't afford it. You can't support yourself and a family on 40 acres of land and a few animals and some, maybe a small bit of livestock. So agriculture and these monoculture farms, large scale farming has really pushed a lot of people out of the rural communities towards urban environments. So there's a lot of the pushing from certain directions saying, okay, we're pushing you out, whether it's pushing you out of a rural community or pushing you out of a country, it's pushing people out, causing them to leave and driving immigration in different areas. Now, there are immigration pull factors. Why do people want to move to the city? Sometimes they're not pushed, but they're pulled, that the cities offer excitement and vitality. So it's just sometimes more fun, more things to do. Look at the nightlife, look at all the shows, look at all the culture, etc. A lot of times there's more jobs. Simply got more businesses in the city, it's easier to find a job sometimes. Not saying they're great jobs, but there's usually never a shortage of job opportunities in larger urban environments. So if I'm living in a rural community and I can't find a decent job, I go to the city, I may have 10 possible job opportunities. Housing, sometimes it's more available. Now, there is that challenge. Might be more expensive, but if you have a job, you might be able to afford it. You get into rural communities, and a lot of times there's just not as much housing opportunity or not as much desirable housing opportunities. Entertainment. You guys move to Chicago or live in a larger urban environment, there's always something to do. Every day there's a show somewhere, there's live music here, there's a festival there, the museums, the zoos, just so many different possible things to do to keep you entertained. And urban environments often offer greater opportunity for social mobility and people to gain power. Do you want to move up in society? Sometimes in rural communities, if you're not from there, if your family wasn't born there and your grandparents weren't born there, you're not truly considered part of that community. So you may not have the same opportunities if you wanted to move up socially. Like, do you want to become the mayor or become an alderman or get involved in politics? Sometimes it's difficult in rural communities or smaller communities if you don't have those family connections because you're not originally from there. Going into a larger, in a sense, a larger pool of people, those family connections are not as important. Who you are becomes more important. How you build relationships with people enables you to gain social mobility in urban environments where it may not be as easy to do in a rural environment. So there's all sorts of different reasons why people leave rural environments or leave countries and get pulled to urban environments or pulled to other countries. So we have to keep those things in mind. And we're socially frustrated with why are these people immigrating to our community. We need to look at what's pushing them out of theirs. And are there things we can do? If we don't want the immigrants here, are there things we can do to help minimize that immigration if we don't want it? Or if we're trying to encourage immigration to our communities, can we enhance the pull factors to say we want more immigrants here? We want our populations to grow because it gives us all these benefits. So there's pros and cons to all this. We need to weigh it out to make educated decisions. Now, as developing countries continue to grow, their urban environments face some serious challenges here. So let's take a look at the challenges that developing world is facing with their urban environment. Okay. So pollution, water and sewer pollution, huge problem. Sanitation, let's just lump that under sanitation issues. You have millions of people converging into an urban environment. You don't have the infrastructure or the resources. Your water quality and your pollution issues are going to explode. Sanitation is a major concern in developing countries. We see hundreds of thousands of people sick in some cases dying every year because of poor sanitary practices. Open sewage in some communities where it just runs down the street in the gutter of the street instead of going through pipes. Water purification is minimal. Huge problems because they don't have the resources to develop it properly. Air pollution. Go back to that unit. Big problems in certain urban environments in the developing world. So, we got lots and lots of pollutants, particulates, etc., creating air pollution problems in developing countries. And then, depending on the urban environment, traffic issues. You get some of these developing countries, as the economy improves and people start having resources, all of a sudden everybody's buying a motorcycle or buying a car, and all of a sudden you have millions of vehicles on the roads that you weren't prepared for, and now you have traffic issues, congestion, just major problems that then continue to contribute to the air pollution and the water and sewer issues within your urban environment. So the developing world faces some significant challenges trying to do this properly so that their citizens can live healthy and have a healthy, safe lifestyle. So when we look at these large environment or large urban environments in developing countries, housing is a major problem. Sometimes we see slums forming. Slums are what we consider an inadequate multifamily tenement. Basically a big housing complex where you have a bunch of people living in there and they're just trash. They're run down, they don't have working resources, the plumbing may not be adequate. There's just all sorts of problems associated with the physical infrastructure of these buildings, but people are still living in them. Sometimes it's all they can afford, or they're not allowed opportunity to move out into other parts of the community and they're forced to live there. Sometimes it's cultural. So lots of reasons why people would live here, but if somebody's living in a slum, it's not a good thing, not safe, healthy, long term. Shanty towns pop up when people start setting up shacks. On the outskirts of town. They're basically, hey, let's just put up a basic building. Got some wood or tin. I got some metal that I can push together to form some walls or form a roof. And I'm going to build myself a basic little house. And then somebody builds next to you and next to you. So the picture on the bottom left, that's a shanty town. But notice how close these people are to the train tracks. There's some huge safety issues there, especially if you have kids living in this shanty town. Kids are playing on the train tracks, trains come by, it's not safe. It's just a horrible, horrible living environment. But they can't afford anything else. They're struggling to survive and just put food. Well, they don't have a table, but just put food in their kids' mouths or their kids' bellies every night when they're going to bed. So a lot of times this becomes a problem. As developing countries, their populations continue to grow, too many people are moving to urban environments and the urban environment can't handle it. The third kind of category of housing when we look at developing countries are these things called squatter towns. All right, squatter towns are where you get a bunch of people just deciding we're going to set up shop, we're going to build a house on land that, well, we're just building our house here. It's land they don't own. They just build a house. And then somebody else builds one, and somebody else builds one. And all of a sudden you have this little town pop up, and people are scratching their head going, where'd they come from? They just, somebody started and somebody else jumped in, and all of a sudden you have dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen homes in a small area on land that's not owned by these people. And they're squatter towns. Some countries have laws in place that if you squat for so long, you then actually become the owner. So it creates a huge, huge challenge. If a landowner discovers squatters, how do they get them off their land before the squatter then officially, legally owns the land? So lots of interesting dynamics there. But we see a lot of this happening in developing countries or less developed countries, third world countries, etc., when people are getting pushed out of their rural environments towards the urban environment. Estimated around 100 million people sit homeless. That's a big number. So that guy sitting in the right-hand picture, he's sleeping on the street, maybe a shelter, maybe a park. So I want you guys to think about that when you're driving around Springfield, if you're in town, and you see the people standing on the corner with the signs, homeless, please help. How many people are you seeing? And is that number growing? And is that number starting to increase over the last several years? Start paying attention. Major intersections in Springfield, there's usually 1, 2, sometimes 3 people on the corners looking for help because they're homeless. Okay, in the next lecture, we'll talk about issues associated with urban sprawl in the developed world.